It was a scene reminiscent of January 6th in Washington. Thousands of rioters storming Brazil's institutions of power on Sunday smashed their way into Congress, the presidential palace, and the Supreme Court just days after the inauguration of a new president. Supporters of defeated far-right President Jair Bolsonaro, the protesters were fueled by his repeated claims of election fraud.
An obvious and clear attack on a democratic process, and we condemn it, of course.
Top Brazilian officials have been arrested. Police are alleged to be complicit as well. Bolsonaro is in Florida, still refusing to acknowledge defeat. So to what extent was all of this inspired by what happened in the United States? And what about concerns that there could be another attack? Let's bring in two journalists from Brazil to break this down for us. Gustavo Ribeiro is in Sao Paulo, and Guilherme Waltenberg joins us from Brasilia. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Guilherme, you were in the newsroom, but your camera operator was in the middle of the riot, attacked repeatedly. Describe for us what happened to him.
Well, basically, he was covering the demonstration that at first was not a violent one. But then when the demonstrators started invading the public buildings, he was trying to take pictures and film the whole situation. And the demonstrators were not okay with that. So some 5 or 6 guys surrounded him and tried to grab his equipment. He fought back and he was able to keep his equipment. But then he was unable to film the whole assault and the whole thing while it was going on. Basically, when a journalist is attacked while he's doing his work, democracy itself has been attacked, because to be able to well-inform population is one of the pillars of democracy itself.
And how is he doing now?
He's doing good. He wasn't very badly hurt, so he's back to work. He's already covering the whole political scenario in Brazil.
Gustavo, as I understand it, there were lots of warnings that this could happen. So why is it that authorities seemed unprepared?
Well, in the eyes of law enforcement, in the eyes of the Supreme Court, it was a malicious and criminal collusion. The Supreme Court placed under investigation the former top security official in Brasilia and ordered his arrest for believing that he deliberately underprepared the city to deal with these protests, and in many ways allowed the scenes that we saw on Sunday happen.
And Guilherme, why would he be underprepared and allow this to happen? What would be the motive?
Well, in my opinion, a combination of 3 factors led to the loss of control over the demonstrators. The first one is that both the local and the federal government underestimated the strength of Bolsonaro radical supporters. A few days earlier, Lula had the biggest inauguration of all times. He brought around 150,000 people to his inauguration. So him and his supporters understood that Bolsonaro and his supporters were a part of the past. And as we saw, they were not. And the second part of it is that the police force supported them while they were trying to invade public buildings. There are many videos showing the policemen helping demonstrators move toward public buildings. And the last reason I understand is the same one as Gustavo just mentioned, the sort of support of the Secretary of Public Security from Brasilia. He left Brazil one day before the demonstrations, and he now has a warrant for his arrest once he steps back in Brazil.
Here's a question again for both of you, and I'll begin with Gustavo. I mean, from a Canadian perspective, and I think for the States as well, it all seems so similar to what happened in the United States, and Bolsonaro seems so similar to Trump making claims of election fraud, and then we see what happened last Sunday. So, Gustavo, to what extent do you think there is this direct line between Trump and Bolsonaro in this regard?
Well, I think it's impossible not to make this connection, because Bolsonaro has borrowed a lot of pages from Donald Trump's playbook, from insisting in this sort of big lie narrative that Brazil's electronic voting system can be rigged without ever offering any shred of evidence to support his claims. He employed many Trumpian style of narratives, and we have found out yesterday that he had it was found with the former Brazilian security officer, who, by the way, was Bolsonaro's former justice minister, a draft decree that, if enacted, would at least would want to give the Bolsonaro the power to overturn the election. Not to go too much into the weeds, it was a sort of intervention into the electoral courts. And this, to make the Trump comparison, bears a lot of resemblance to Trump's bid to get Georgia authorities to, quote unquote, find himself enough votes to win the election.
And Guilherme, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, basically, I think Trump serves as an inspiration for Bolsonaro, and that has never been a secret. But Bolsonaro has a personality of his own as well. And unlike Trump, he wasn't personally into the mob, and he wasn't, during the riot, he was not tweeting or doing anything. He was just quiet and waiting for his time. But we know that his son, Eduardo, who's a congressman in Brazil, is really close to Steve Bannon. So, yes, definitely, they inspired what happened in Brazil.
And Guilherme, the military, as I understand, is on high alert this weekend in Brazil. What are you hearing about the possibility of another attack?
Well, I don't think something like that is going to happen again, especially because the federal government has made an intervention in public security in Brasilia, the capital city of Brazil. So if in the past, if a week ago, one of the reasons why the demonstrators were able to invade public buildings and what they did was because there was a lack of control over the police force, it is not going to happen again, because now the police force is under the control of the federal government, who is basically the main target of those demonstrators.
And Gustavo, maybe I'll finish with this for Canadians who are watching, who are potential tourists, you know, thinking about visiting Brazil or do business in Brazil. Do they have any reason to be concerned about the instability in your country?
Well, I agree with Guilherme. I don't think we're going to see anything of the magnitude of January the 8th. I think that for tourists, the dangers are very reduced because they're not trying to create this general sense of violence, but rather intimidate the government. So I wouldn't think that for tourists that there is a major issue, other than problems with violence that we already have.
We don't hear a lot in Canada about the politics of Brazil, so I really appreciate both of you giving us your insights tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.